In the east, beyond the deserts of Persia, beyond the mountains scarred by rebellion, lay a land unlike anything Alexander had ever seen. A land of war elephants, monsoon storms, and kingdoms older than Greece itself. Here, the young conqueror would face not just armies, but destiny. This is the untold story of Alexander's march into India, the campaign that tested his strength, shattered his army, and revealed the limits of human ambition. Alexander had conquered Persia. He had burned Persepolis. He had crushed rebellion and proclaimed himself King of Asia. But the world was not finished with him. Beyond the eastern horizon, ancient kingdoms watched him with suspicion, some with fear, some with fury, and one with the calm confidence of a king who ruled over countless gilded elephants. This is where the next chapter begins. The year was 327 BCE. Alexander stood at the farthest edge of the Persian Empire, staring toward lands described only in myth. To the Greeks, India was a dream, a place of gold, strange beasts, and warriors who wrapped themselves in cotton instead of bronze. The land where the god Dionysus had roamed, a land of mystery and challenge. And for Alexander, the unknown was irresistible. But before he could march eastward, he had to stabilize the frontier, a frontier crawling with rebels who refused to accept a Macedonian king. Sogdiana and Bactria, modern-day Uzbekistan and Afghanistan, were not defeated nations. They were wild, mountainous worlds where freedom was as essential as breath. Alexander's army had survived deserts, assassins, and politics, but now they faced enemies familiar with every rock, valley, and hidden path. Led by the fierce Spidomenes, Sogdian tribes struck from shadows, killing Alexander's men, then fading into the mountains. It was a war with no front lines, no fortresses to siege, no kings to negotiate with. Alexander adapted. He learned the terrain. He split his forces. He hunted rebels like a wolf chasing foxes through snow. It took 2 brutal years. But when Spidomenes' allies betrayed him, the rebellion collapsed. The frontier was finally quiet. But the cost had been enormous. For the first time, Alexander sensed cracks in his army's spirit. During the Sogdian campaigns, Alexander captured a mountain fortress so steep that even goats struggled to climb it. Inside was the daughter of a Bactrian noble, Roxana. Legend says she was the most beautiful woman in Asia, but more importantly, she represented something far greater: unity. Alexander married her not merely for love, but to bind his new eastern subjects to him. His Macedonian generals were outraged. A Macedonian king marrying a local girl? But Alexander didn't care. He was no longer just a Macedonian king. He was becoming something larger. While the Macedonians whispered in their tents, Alexander stared toward the horizon. India, the land of elephants, the land of endless rivers, the land where kings ruled cities larger than any in Greece. No Greek king had ever marched there. No Greek soldier had ever crossed its borders. But Alexander believed he was not just a king. He believed he was destined. Destined to see the limits of the world, destined to conquer what no one else dared. He gathered his generals. The order was simple. We march east. Alexander's army crossed the Hindu Kush, their armor freezing in the mountain wind. Some horses died, some soldiers vanished into ravines, but still they marched. At last, they reached the land the Greeks called Panchanata, the land of 5 rivers, known today as Punjab. Here, Alexander met kings unlike any he had encountered. Some surrendered immediately. Others offered cautious friendship, but a few prepared for war. Among them was the most feared ruler in the region, King Porus of the Parava kingdom. a man whose kingdom stretched along the mighty river Hydaspes, a king who commanded towering war elephants, beasts the Greeks had never fought before. Porus was no petty chieftain. He was a giant of a man, tall, imposing, and fiercely proud. When Alexander sent a message ordering him to submit, Porus sent back a single reply: "I will meet Alexander as a king meets another king in battle." The stage was set. 2 kings, 2 armies, a river swollen by monsoon rains between them. This would become one of the most dramatic battles of antiquity. Rain hammered the plains. Lightning crawled across the sky. The Hydaspes River raged like a beast in chains. Porus lined the river bank with war elephants, their tusks sharpened, their bodies armored. Each elephant was a moving fortress, capable of crushing men under their feet. Alexander stared at the river. A direct crossing would be suicide, so he chose deception.
Alexander adapted instantly. He ordered his men to target the mahouts, the drivers. Leaderless elephants rampaged wildly, destroying friend and foe alike. Then Alexander's cavalry struck the sides. Porus's infantry wavered. The Macedonian phalanx pushed forward. It was chaos. It was thunder. It was a war of giants. Hours passed. Both kings were wounded. Both armies bled. But slowly, the Macedonian line advanced. Porus refused to surrender. Even when blood soaked his armor, even when his elephant collapsed beneath him, he stood tall, fighting, roaring, refusing to kneel. At last, he was surrounded, captured, brought before Alexander. The Macedonian king looked at the proud warrior. "How do you wish to be treated?" Alexander asked. Porus replied, "Like a king." Alexander smiled. "That," he said, "you shall have." He returned Porus's kingdom. He granted him new lands. He made him an ally. The respect between the 2 kings would become legend. Alexander wanted to push deeper toward the Ganges, a river said to guard a world greater than anything yet seen. But his army was exhausted. Sogdiana had drained them. India had shaken them. The monsoons crushed their morale. When Alexander declared his plan to march further east, his soldiers did something unthinkable. They refused. They stood in the mud, their armor rusting, their eyes empty. They had nothing left to give. Alexander walked among them, pleading, arguing, demanding. But their answer was final. They would go no farther. For the first time in his life, Alexander was forced to retreat. The world had edges, and he had finally reached one. The journey back west was a nightmare. Alexander split his army in 2, one marching through mountains, the other through the deadly Gedrosian desert. The desert swallowed men, horses, and supplies. Heat boiled the sand. Thirst drove soldiers mad. Thousands died. Alexander shared their suffering. He refused water unless everyone had enough. But even kings cannot defeat the desert. The cost was unimaginable. When Alexander finally reached Persia again, he was no longer just a conqueror. He was weary, changed, haunted by what he had seen in India and by the limits he had finally recognized. His empire was vast, stretching from Greece to Egypt to Persia to the borders of India. But ruling it would be more difficult than conquering it. Alexander appointed new satraps. He reorganized his armies. He blended cultures, marrying East and West into a single identity. This was not a Greek empire, not a Persian one. It was something new, something the world had never seen. But storms still gathered. Court conspiracies, generals whispering, tensions between Macedonians and Persians, cities waiting to rebel. Alexander's dream was enormous, but so was the resistance. And far to the west, in Babylon, fate was preparing its final blow. The conqueror of worlds was running out of days. Empires are built by ambition, but they are tested by endurance. Alexander conquered the world, but in India, the world pushed back. His army broke, his dream bent, and the young king was forced to face the one enemy he could never defeat, the limits of mortality. Join us in Alexander Part 5 as we follow the king back to Babylon, where the final chapter of his extraordinary life begins.